Have you ever looked at a perfectly delicious plate of food and just for a second wondered what might be lurking there, totally invisible to the naked eye? Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. The unseen biological hazards in our food. Let's get right into it.
So, what are we actually talking about here? Well, a biological hazard is basically any living thing or a nasty toxin it makes that can contaminate our food. They fall into 5 main groups. You've got your bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungi, and then these really weird things called prions. And yeah, we're going to beat all of them today.
And why is this such a big deal? I mean, really, why should you care? Because these tiny hazards are responsible for the huge majority of foodborne illnesses all over the world. The impact is, well, it's a triple threat. It hammers public health, it hits the economy with massive costs, and it can completely destroy a food brand's reputation, wrecking consumer trust. The stakes are just incredibly high.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start by uncovering our food's hidden dangers with a deep dive we're calling the bacterial breakdown. Then we'll expand our search to include viruses, parasites, and more. After we've met the villains, we'll see how we fight back with our layered defense system, and we'll wrap up with some really important lessons from outbreaks.
First up, the bacterial breakdown. I want you to think of this as the most wanted list in the world of food safety. Bacteria are, hands down, the most common and significant group of these hazards, so we're starting with the real heavy hitters.
Now, bacteria have 2 different ways of making us sick. It's kind of fascinating. Over on the left, you see an infection. That's where the actual bacteria get into your body and start to multiply. On the right, that's intoxication. This is when you eat a toxin that the bacteria already created in the food before you even took a bite. 2 different methods, same miserable result.
Our first suspect on the list is a name you definitely know: Salmonella. It loves to hang out in raw poultry, eggs, and dairy products. It causes a pretty nasty infection. You know it as food poisoning, but the technical term is gastroenteritis. This is exactly why cook your chicken all the way through is probably the most important advice you'll ever get in the kitchen.
Next up, a particularly nasty character, E. coli 0157H7. It's most famous for its connection to undercooked ground beef. And what makes this one so feared is the incredibly potent Shiga toxin it produces, which can lead to really severe stuff like kidney failure. And here's the really scary part. It has a very low infectious dose. That means it takes just a tiny amount to make you incredibly sick.
All right, now for a truly unique threat, Listeria. Its superpower? It can actually grow and multiply at refrigerator temperatures. Yeah, you heard me right, in your fridge. This makes ready-to-eat foods like deli meats and soft cheeses a potential risk, especially for pregnant women, the elderly, and anyone with a weakened immune system. It's a danger that hides right where you think it's safest, in the cold.
And here we have a specialist, Clostridium botulinum. This bacteria is anaerobic. What's that mean? It thrives where there's no oxygen. That's precisely why it's the classic villain of improperly canned or preserved foods. It pumps out one of the most potent neurotoxins known to science, causing the paralysis we call botulism.
And rounding out our top bacterial threats is Campylobacter. This one is actually a leading cause of bacterial food poisoning around the world, and you'll find it in poultry and unpasteurized milk. And while the initial sickness is bad enough, in some rare cases, it can trigger a really serious autoimmune disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome.
So bacteria might be the most common culprits, but believe me, they are not the only threats out there. So now we're expanding our most wanted list. Viruses, parasites, fungi, and prions might be less common, but each one presents its own unique and serious challenges.
Okay, the absolute key thing to understand about viruses is this. They don't grow in the food itself. Food is just the vehicle. It's like a taxi service, getting the virus from an infected person to a new person. And this fact completely changes how we have to think about controlling them.
The poster child for foodborne viruses has got to be norovirus. You've probably heard of it, causing those massive outbreaks on cruise ships. It is incredibly contagious. It just takes a few particles to cause an infection. The most common routes: contaminated water or an infected food handler. This is exactly why wash your hands is the absolute golden rule of food safety. It's that simple.
Next up in our rogues gallery, let's talk about parasites. Now, these are organisms that actually need to live on or inside another creature, a host, to survive. And when it comes to food, they spread when their tiny eggs or larvae get into water or onto food, which we then eat, usually in something like undercooked meat or fish.
And parasites are a surprisingly diverse group. On one hand, you've got these microscopic waterborne protozoa like Giardia, which is famous for being really resistant to chlorine. And then, on the other hand, you've something totally different like Trichinella, which is a roundworm you can find in undercooked pork or wild game. Two very different organisms, but they have the same sneaky goal: find a new home.
Now for fungi. Look, we've all seen mold on a piece of bread and known to throw it out, right? But the real danger isn't always the fuzzy stuff you can see. The invisible threat comes from what are called mycotoxins, which certain molds produce. These can contaminate things like cereals, nuts, and grains, and they can be seriously harmful to us.
And finally, we have the absolute strangest threat of them all: prions. These things aren't even alive. They're just misfolded proteins that have this terrifying ability to cause other proteins to misfold, leading to fatal brain diseases. The most famous example, of course, is mad cow disease, which can be transmitted to people through contaminated beef.
All right, that was quite a tour of some tiny terrors. But the good news is, we are not defenseless. So how do we fight back against all these invisible threats? Well, the answer lies in a smart, layered defense system.
This pyramid illustrates the core idea perfectly. See, food safety isn't just one magic bullet. It's a whole defense architecture that's built from the ground up. This shows that each layer stands on a foundation of other systems, all working together to keep us safe. So let's break down that pyramid, starting from the bottom. The foundation is GAP, which stands for Good Agricultural Practices. Safety starts right on the farm. The next layer up is GMP, Good Manufacturing Practices. This covers sanitation and hygiene inside the processing plant. And at the very top, we have HACCP, which is a systematic way to identify and control hazards before they become a problem. GAP, GMP, HACCP. Each layer supports the one above it. But of course, no system is ever going to be perfect, and when things do go wrong, the consequences can be absolutely devastating. But it's by studying and learning from those failures that we actually build a stronger, safer future for everyone.
Just think about these two tragic examples, both from 2011. Here in the US, a listeria outbreak in cantaloupes was traced back to some really basic sanitation failures, and it cost 33 people their lives. Over in Europe, an E. coli outbreak in sprouts sickened thousands and killed more than 50 people, and that crisis was made so much worse because of failures in tracing the source quickly enough.
As devastating as those events were, they became powerful wake-up calls. The hard lessons learned from them led directly to better regulations, tougher inspection rules, and stronger safety systems that are working right now to help protect all of us.
And that brings us to our final thought. Our food system today is more global and more complex than it has ever been in human history. We've built some incredible defenses, but new challenges are always just around the corner. So the question we're left with is this: are our defenses ready for whatever the next threat might be?